Okay. Well, we're going to get started here. I have just a little bit after 1 o'clock. So welcome, Jackson, and those online. Um, we're going to be doing a workshop on finding credible resources and references sources for your research project. So before we get started, though, I always like to do a little um,
You can use the clicker too.
there we go, icebreaker. So last time I met with everyone, we talked about patios. But today I thought we would just do something a little different. So on a scale of dog, how's everyone feeling? People can say in the chat how they're feeling today. Uh, Jackson, how are you feeling? If you had to identify on this scale, dog scale, how are you feeling?
Probably about a 9.
A 9. I like that. Is that a corgi? I'm not sure, but that looks good. That looks good. What about you guys?
I'll be honest, I'm a 1. Feeling a little dazed today.
For sure. Well, that'd be more like a 6. I think it's yawning. Morgana?
Somewhere between 4 and 6. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I'm feeling probably like a 7. Like it's the sun is shining finally, so for sure. Awesome. Well, it's good to take a temperature of the room. So, what are we going to be doing today? We're going to be talking a little bit about finding credible sources and where to look for credible sources in terms of different information sources, but also what makes a source credible. So, we often use those words, but what does it actually mean, and what are some characteristics that we can look for to easily identify what a credible source might be. And so we'll go through some search tools that we have access to through the university, and hopefully you will all leave here both in person and online with some practical tools in terms of how to find some credible sources for whatever your research area is, because it is dependent on the context. So I should back up and introduce myself. Some people may already know me, but just for those who are new, my name is Angie Gerard, and I'm a librarian, a social sciences librarian in the Murray Library. Um, so some of my examples may lean towards the more social sciences. I lead specifically with the departments of political studies and psychology, so that's my kind of background area. But I know a lot of you all come from different disciplines, so I'm hoping that you can see the applicability across your disciplines. So one of the things that I find helpful is to have like a framework or something to kind of situate my thinking and the presentation. And so something I've used many times in the past, and you may or may not be familiar with the research skill development framework, it's a framework that researchers have used to kind of show the continuum of research skills from novice researchers all the way up to like professor level type PhD research skill development. And it shows that there's a development. I forgot to bring, there's a rainbow chart that shows these research skills and how that you can develop. I think it's across like 8 stages. But one of the other things that the research skill development framework produced is this pentagon. And I find this pentagon helpful in terms of representing the research process. And so you can see that there's different kind of stages of the research process. So there's find and generate, evaluate and reflect, organize and manage, analyze and synthesize, and communicate and apply. And so you can see how, oh, and in the middle, embark and clarify. So that kind of beginning stage. So you can see how the research process is represented as more of a pentagon as opposed to maybe a linear process. And the reason I like this is that you can kind of situate yourself on like, where am I? And what are those questions that I need to ask of myself at those different stages. And we're going to be focusing today on the find and generate and the evaluate and reflect. And the two main questions there are, what do we need and who do we trust? And so those are kind of the guiding questions for today. Who do I trust and what do I need? But one of the things that I think is helpful, and I talked about this last week, I believe, is that idea of when you're in doubt and when you're looking for sources or you're not sure of the applicability or relevancy of what you're finding, is that idea of always going back to your research question, always going back, in this case, to the center. What are you trying to answer? What are you trying to address? And so when in doubt, go back to the center, because that's really where your research question is, and you're kind of like your guiding light or your North Star. So that's what I've used to kind of situate today's presentation in terms of those two key parts. All right, so as I mentioned, the first leading question is, what and who do I trust? And so oftentimes, and this might be more applicable when you're just starting university and maybe you're in a class and your professor says on the syllabus, let's just say expectation that you'll cite reputable or trustworthy or credible sources, or I only want to see quality sources. And oftentimes those are words that we don't unpack. And sometimes instructors aren't always explicit about what that actually means. And so it's important just to take a step back and be like, what does that actually mean in terms of those types of sources? And it also depends on the discipline, because a quality source in one discipline might not necessarily be deemed as high quality in other disciplines. And so that makes it even more complicated for students who are taking a variety of classes from a variety of disciplines. And so when we're looking at reputable sources, it's important to, again, be explicit about what makes a source reputable and what clues or characteristics can you look for to identify and assess a quality source. And so we had a roundtable about, or some ideas and discussions about this last time, but there might be some people who are new online who weren't part of that conversation. So if Jackson or people online want to provide some ideas in terms of maybe, again, what are those kind of quick characteristics or criteria that you look for when you're looking at the quality of an information source? If you want to
I
address
said
it.
this last time, I'll say it again, just taking a quick scan of the references
Absolutely.
and like, is this, I thought it was really funny because I think it was you who said like, does this have a Reddit source or,
Right.
it's like, I never thought of it that way, but it was just like, if you look at the sources, you can see like, are these journals, were they cited, who made those?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. So it's
If they
like,
exist at all.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, exactly. That's it. Like, first of all, are there references? And second of all, what are the quality of those references? Absolutely. And yeah, like not only do they exist, but doing a little bit more analysis in terms of, are they citing sources that are peer reviewed, scholarly, or are they citing sources that are more what would be deemed popular or not as high quality with regards to scholarship, for sure. If folks in the chat have any ideas, that would be great. But if not, I'll just move on. So these are some things that, again, it's the idea of when you're doing research, literature searching, you're going to be inundated with references. And so there's these tools and these criteria that you should just have in your back pocket that you probably even have, but you don't even know you have, in terms of quickly assessing the quality of a source. And again, sometimes you're looking at the content in terms of, is this content relevant to my research question? But sometimes you're looking at more what I call external kind of characteristics. So the first one is, who wrote it, right? Like, are they experts in their field? And oftentimes we may get blinded by, how would I say, the PhD maybe blinders, where sometimes we might see that someone has a PhD and we think, oh, therefore they're knowledgeable in this area. But it's important to note that whatever area you're looking at, that those authors have expertise in that area. So if I was looking for medical advice, I might not necessarily rely on someone who has a PhD in climate science, let's say. So you want to make sure that they're experts in their field. And expertise can come from a variety of areas. Oftentimes we do associate expertise and authority with PhDs, but there's lots of other expertise that exists in scholarship, and that could be from lived experience. It can be from different levels of expertise, so it might be from elders. And so expertise and authority is not just always, you know, an indicator just by a PhD. So there's other forms of expertise we want to make sure that we're looking at. And again, it depends on the research question. And so that leads to the next point about the author's credentials. And so what are their credentials in terms of why are they experts in this? And so again, their area of expertise should be related to what is discussed. Jackson already mentioned about the idea of, is the bibliography or references available? And if so, why is that important? Well, therefore, then you can dig in and you can review their evidence and check, their what they used. Is it reviewed by others in the field? And so often peer review is a gold standard that we use for papers in our field, in scholarship in general. And so why is that important? Well, you just want to ensure that others have gone through and assessed whether this actually is a quality product. Depending on your research area, currency or date is important. Again, that really depends. If you're in the humanities, maybe not as much, versus maybe in the sciences when it's rapidly changing and date is important. And another thing to look for is any conflicts of interest or sponsored research. That's quite common now, that whenever you read a journal article, at the bottom it will have a conflict of interest statement. And so it's important to note that and to see if any research is sponsored, because that obviously might take on a different vibe depending on if, let's say, a certain chemical company was sponsoring a certain scientific paper on said chemical. So those are all just things that you can quickly assess by looking at the paper. And these are things that, again, will just become almost like common practice when you're coming across research. And so we've talked about peer review. Peer review is one marker of credibility. It tends to be the most popular kind of indicator of quality. Oftentimes, you want to ensure that other experts in the field have reviewed it to ensure that it is sound research. Is it a foolproof process? Absolutely not, but it's what we have right now. We've talked about open scholarship practices in past sessions, and open peer review is a newish, technique that you might see come across. And I think that's a good way forward in terms of opening up or what's going on behind the curtain, so to speak, with peer review. But oftentimes, for all intents and purposes, peer review is often deemed kind of the highest standard of scientific research. Okay. Other research might come up, or other types of research might be part of your research program depending on your discipline. And so some disciplines may not rely on peer-reviewed scientific research, empirical-based research articles. And so it's the idea of how can you quickly assess article or other types of research. And so we talked about this last time, that oftentimes you'll start to develop recognition based on certain names and organizations that are considered reputable in your field. And as you become further into your discipline and your area of expertise, you'll just start to recognize those. Again, it'll just be like second nature in terms of familiarity with those ones. We also talked about if you're not sure, if you're coming across organizations that are new or websites or what have you, and you're not sure how or if they are a reputable source, one of the best things to do is that lateral reading technique that we talked about. And it's really about moving beyond that source to see what other people are saying about that particular organization, institution, that kind of thing. And so the example that I include there is the American College of Pediatricians. You look at their website. Actually, I think I have you look at their website. Not bad, like it looks professional. Like back in the day, it used to be like, is it a professional looking website? And nowadays, anyone can do a professional looking website. So that's not an indicator anymore. But if you were to look at their content, you might be like, okay, but if you literally took like 2 minutes, not even, got 30 seconds, and you did a search on the American College of Pediatricians, you'll see that they're what do they call it? Social conservative religious advocacy group of pediatricians and healthcare professionals. And they advocate for abstinence-only sex education and conversion therapy. So, ooh. You might want to use that as a source in terms of, this is an example of blah, 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 but you would want to know what you're citing, right? And so, again, if you were to go into their website and did a deep dive into their website, they might not necessarily be forthcoming with that information. They might not. But again, if you literally do a lateral move to open a new tab and do a quick, this is Wikipedia, you'll see what others are saying about them. So as you become familiar with some sources, you'll have that name recognition. But if you don't, again, just do a quick lateral search and you'll see what you can see. We also noted that oftentimes whenever we come across claims or quotes or stories are often missing, they're often taken potentially out of context, or maybe it's a sound bite. And so when you can, often, if you can, you always want to go back to the primary source. So we say, follow the science, right? And so if something's coming up and like I said, often in like a news story, or you're just getting a sound bite on social media and you're like, I don't know if that's accurate. If you can go back to the source, that would be always important, just because like anything, context matters. And oftentimes when you see something that's been stripped of its context, then it loses a lot of the detail. So just like that poster, right? So when possible, go back to the original source. Any questions about that process? About reputable, like what makes a source trustworthy? Awesome. Okay. So the second bit is that idea of now that you kind of have that in your back of your mind, like when I'm coming across sources, how am I going to quickly evaluate them? It's the idea of, okay, how do I find them? Lots of times people do the opposite, where they're like, I'm going to find some sources and I'm going to evaluate, which I think naturally that happens. But if you kind of have that mental kind of treadmill going right now, where you're like, okay, when I'm coming across sources, what are these criteria that I'm going to be looking for? Or what am I going to be using to assess? So the next one is that idea of like what that leading question is, like, what do I need? Because oftentimes when we're looking at information sources, it all looks the same on a screen, right? Back in the day, you'd have a physical book or a physical newspaper or a physical journal article, but now everything's online. And so the actual kind of container, it all looks the same. And so oftentimes it's hard to know, like, am I looking at a dissertation? Am I looking at a newspaper article? Like, it's often hard to make that distinction in terms of what you're looking at. And you might not even have that terminology in terms of what is this thing? And so there's lots of different ways that we can kind of classify or categorize information types. So you can, classify them by format, right? Like I was saying, like a journal article or a book or a social media post, or let's say a government document. You can also kind of slice and dice it by who's the intended audience. So is this particular information source meant for academics and more of a scholarly audience, or is it meant for more the general public? And then you can also talk about it in terms of what's the purpose or the originality of the source. So is it a primary source, secondary source, tertiary source? So these are all different ways to kind of classify information sources. And it's important because oftentimes you want to know what you're looking at, because what you're looking at and how it's kind of packaged serves a purpose. And so, for instance, if we're looking at more tertiary, primary, and secondary, each of these source types and serve a purpose in terms of what they do. And so something like a tertiary source, these are things like Wikipedia entries, or maybe something you'd find in a textbook or maybe a handbook. And it's really meant to give you that background of a topic, a large topic that is like condensed into a very kind of synopsis. And that's great, especially when you're new to a topic and you just want to kind of get a lay of the land. And often the authors of those sources have looked at, a lot of sources to make that kind of really condensed product. And really the purpose of that, as noted in red there, is just to get that background. And so that's why looking at things like Wikipedia and handbooks and those kind of things give you that nice overview. Then there's primary sources. And primary sources, it depends on what discipline you're in, but those are really to provide kind of firsthand experiences or accounts or original data. And so it's kind of what people see, what people say, or what people write. And that could include things like, social media posts. It can include data, statistics, maps, newspapers, legislation, that kind of thing. It can also, in the sciences and some social sciences, include original experimental, like empirical research articles. Secondary sources are more one removed, right? Where people are doing analysis of the primary source. And so this is where scholars interpret or analyze or draw conclusions from those primary sources and present new knowledge. And so these come in the form of scholarly books, scholarly book reviews, that kind of thing. And again, as noted in red, that's really looking at the argument or the analysis of that. And so I think it's important to think about your sources in terms of what am I looking at and what is the purpose of them? Because sometimes people are like, I want to look at this, let's say, journal article, and I want an overview of all the different theories on this particular topic. And it's like, well, that's not really the purpose of this, of a journal article. And so it's sometimes important to think about what are you looking at and what's the purpose of it. And again, it's context specific. And so scholarly peer-reviewed journal articles may be in some disciplines considered primary sources and others secondary. Okay, so an example of a tertiary or background source would be, again, like an example of a Wikipedia article that gives a great summary and provides references to both primary and secondary sources. Social media posts would be an example of primary sources. This government statistics yearbook would be considered a primary source. And then a secondary source in this particular discipline, and this is this is a scoping review, so it's looking at a lot of different sources and reviewed them under the topic of labor trafficking. This would be considered a secondary source. So why does this matter? Well, that cut off there a little. Okay. It's looking at you have to determine what are you looking at, and then you're considering the quality of the evidence based on that. And so these are some questions that you can be looking at in terms of, what am I looking at and what is the purpose of this? So for instance, you can see that when in this diagram or this image, that there's kind of a continuum of sources. And again, it's not to say like one is bad and the other ones are good. It's just the idea of what am I looking at and what's the purpose. So, you want to pay attention to those kind of things that you might see on the actual document. Because again, it all kind of looks the same online. Is it a news article? Is it an opinion piece, an editorial? That's different, right? Than something that might be empirical journal article, right? Or a randomized control trial. And something more like a review, like a systematic review or a scoping review, that's even kind of a better kind of quality of evidence, if that's what is considered quality evidence in your particular field. And so it's just that idea of paying attention to what you're looking at and if it's kind of scholarly versus maybe not as scholarly. Straightforward? Awesome. Jackson, you're my temperature gauge here in terms of how it's going. And so the reason I bring this up though, is that these are very grand statements. And I've said before, context matters. So for instance, in psychology, which is essentially clinical psychology, which is often in the realm of health sciences, we use evidence-based medicine and evidence-based decision-making. And often we have what we call this hierarchy of evidence in terms of kind of going up the triangle, kind of what's better kind of evidence, right? And so at the bottom is more this background information. At the very top is systematic reviews, and there's lots of different types of evidence in between. So that's in the health sciences, but that might not be the same in computer science or chemistry. And I don't know that, right? I have heard, and maybe Jackson, is your background in computer science? Yeah. And so are conference proceedings quite reputable in your area? Like, do you guys use them a lot?
I haven't seen one.
Okay. So we'll go with a no. But it might be, okay, let's hypothetically say conference proceedings, are like where it's at, right? Where it's like, this is where people come and present on the newest thing about what's going on in that discipline. And so they may be deemed kind of higher up on that hierarchy of evidence than, let's say, like book chapters, right? Because, books take so long to get published that they're just kind of, books are good for maybe overviews, but in terms of cutting edge research, conference proceedings or these peer reviewed journal articles are where it's at. And so it's just really important to become familiar about what counts as evidence in your discipline. And you might be a summer student working in a discipline that maybe isn't your kind of home discipline. So you might be working in engineering, but you're really in ag or vice versa. And so it's important to recognize, and when you're looking for research, is have those conversations with your supervisor in terms of, when we're looking at high quality evidence, what does that look like in this particular field?
And your librarian in that particular
Mhm.
field would be a good person to probably go to for that kind of information, right?
Absolutely, absolutely,
Yeah.
for sure, for sure. Just because, and even in like the social sciences, as I said, like systematic reviews are like top notch in psychology, but in political studies, empirical journal articles tend to be more, popular and that kind of thing. So it really depends. It really depends. And so context matters, and it's not the expectation that you will necessarily know this all. It's just more the idea of, evidence comes in various formats and in various levels of trustworthiness. And so it's just to be aware of all those kinds of things. Cool. Okay, so now it's like we're thinking about, okay, I went on and on about these kind of different information source types and what purpose they serve. But it's the idea, okay, well, how do I go about finding some of these credible sources? So, Jackson, when you're looking for credible information sources, do you have like a go-to place or places?
I use Google Scholar sometimes.
Yeah.
I use some other, you can generally search like the archives themselves. So like our archive, if you see that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like do they have a lot of preprints there? And
I think so.
Yeah.
Most of their stuff is free and openly accessible, so.
Right.
I tend to cite them, like the stuff that's on there quite a bit.
Right, for sure. So it's like a repository?
Yeah.
For sure. Okay. And if folks in the chat want to mention anything or any places that they look for credible sources, that would be awesome.
Another good place is if you find a credible source that you deemed credible, it's cite stuff, Rich.
Perfect. Yes, follow the web, absolutely. The connections, for sure. Did you go to the Research Rabbit session? Was it helpful?
Not the Research Rabbit one.
Oh, the
That one
Zotero.
was online.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was.
Okay. Okay, I don't think there's anyone in the chat that commented, so, okay. So there's no like right or wrong places to go. Again, it depends on your information need. But I always want to make sure that folks know that there's kind of not safer, but efficient places to go within the library. Because a lot of, as we know, we have to do a lot of assessment of the sources that we're coming across. And one of the time-saving tools is to use resources that are sponsored by the library, where it's like, you know, we've paid access to a lot of these resources and, you know, they're deemed trustworthy. And so it's not to say that this is the be all and end all, but it's they're good places to know about, especially there's subject specific resources that you should just be aware of, either for this your summer project and or moving forward. Okay, so oh yeah, so let me just back up. So there's USearch, which is like our Google-like product on our homepage. We have subject-specific databases. We have subject-specific research guides that are like curated lists of resources for the different disciplines, as well as we have liaison librarians who have expertise in those subject areas. So there's lots of places and resources to know about. Morgana, is there anything in the chat that I need to be?
Chat, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So USearch. So USearch is on the library homepage. And it's kind of like a Google-like search engine where it includes a lot of different types of formats. So there's journal articles, there's books, there's conference proceedings. It's the idea of when you're starting off, perhaps in your research, and you're not exactly sure where you want to continue, and maybe you just want to get a couple, you know, I just need a couple of good sources to get started. That's when I recommend using USearch. Not everything is indexed in USearch. So for instance, in my area, APA Psych Info and all that content is not included in USearch, so it's not everything. But like as I mentioned, it's sometimes a good place to go when you're just starting off.
The other thing I like to use USearch for is if I hear about a good article, or if somebody referenced an article and I want to find a copy of that article, I'll just copy the name of that and put it in USearch, and 90% of the time it finds me an online version of it that I can throw into Zotero and do what I need to do with and give me a proper citation. And
For sure.
yeah, so that's a great way to just like find where on the web I have access to that as a USass student.
Perfect. Okay. I couldn't click in the subject or in the toolbar. So Morgana, were you going to say something? Okay, so I thought I interrupted you. Okay. Yeah, so USearch is that, sorry, and this is just library.usas.ca. So yeah, that's the main search kind of box, and they say quick search, right? So yeah, if you have a known citation and you're like, I just want to plug it in here and see if we have access to it, awesome. And if we don't have access to it, it still might come up, and then you can request it through interlibrary loan, which we talked about last week. So, but yeah, so this is kind of the easy or basic search, but if you go under advanced search, it just gives you some more options in terms of what you might find here. So if I just do a quick search here, I'll do food allergies and social anxiety here. Okay. Just to demonstrate. Have you used USearch before? No? Okay. So as you can see here, it came up with lots of different results. And you can see on the left side, there's filters. So this is quite common to a lot of our other database products that, and just maybe other information finding aids, is that you'll often find there's ways to filter and refine your search on the left side. And so what you can find though is that there's different types of resources. And so as I mentioned, this is kind of a conglomerate of lots of different types. So there's articles, book chapters, conference proceedings, dissertations, that kind of thing. And so you can limit by those particular sources. Yeah, I've never seen this, like this red.
No, I've never.
Cross, and I was like, what is this? I have never seen that before, so I'm not sure. It says excluded articles. I'm not sure what that even means. Okay.
Oh, so just don't include articles.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Okay, I have never seen that before. Okay, let me go back there. Yeah, and so what I wanted to show though is that on the right-hand side, that's where you can get access to those different resources. And so, for instance, I did this dissertation, so a PhD dissertation, you can see that it's available online and you can click through to get access to it. And so it's a way of getting, like I said, often a good starting point when you're new to a topic and you want to see what exists on it. One of the things, and I just want to see if I can just go back here. One of the things that I find helpful is when I'm starting a new topic and I want to know where it's like, okay, where would I find more like similar, like where would I go? Which other databases might I want to use to find other things that are similar? And I'm just looking on the left side, there should be, oh yes, under collection. So collection is a way because like, gosh, the library has access to like hundreds of databases. And sometimes it's like, I have no idea where to look, like which databases I should be focusing on. And so when you click on collection, it tells you and it ranks it by like, kind of popularity or not, but numbers. And so it's basically saying with this particular topic, these particular sources might be ones you might want to go and do a deeper dive into. And so that's helpful because, again, this is a starting point. It's not always comprehensive. Certain products aren't included in here, but this gives you a list of some other areas that you might want to do a deeper dive into. Yeah, so that's USearch.
Presentation on 2 and 3 over to your right. That one.
Thank you. Okay, that's different. Okay. Where are we at? Okay. Okay. So I just did some screen captures that way. If folks are looking at this afterwards and just the slides, they can just see kind of how to access that. Yeah. And so also another really good resource are our research guides. We're doing actually as of July 1st, they're going to have a new name, library guides. Revolutionary. No, because oftentimes some of our guides aren't necessarily research guides. They might be things on like how to, APA style or open science or something like that. So they're not always like research or subject guides. But look for that word guide. And what you'll find is that there's a research guide for all the different subject areas on campus, like disciplines. And so that's a good way to look at a curated list of resources in that discipline. Also, your liaison librarian contact information will be listed on that particular research guide. And most liaison librarians have the option to book an appointment like online. And so you can look at calendars, book an appointment for either in person or Zoom. And all that contact information is listed there. So look for the research guide in your particular area. And as I mentioned, the library has access to so many different databases and we spend so much money on these. And so I just want to make sure that they get used. Seriously, anyway, I'm not going to go on a tangent. Yes.
I think on the Zoom, we can see the presenter side of things.
Okay. That's what I see here. Okay. So how do I?
This one. Duplicate slideshow. I don't know why it switched.
Okay, thank you.
Is that better? Mark?
Thanks for that. Cool. I'm always like, what are people seeing? Are they seeing this?
I know.
I apologize for that.
We'll go with the hybrid.
I am happy everyone's online, so thank you. And so as I mentioned, I really want to just surface the idea that we have so many different databases. And I think instructors often expect that students are using some of these sources. And so it's good just to be aware of them. As I said, we have so many, and oftentimes it's often difficult to know, like, well, which one should I use? Um, we have ones that are more multidisciplinary. So you may have heard of Web of Science or Scopus. Those are very well-known interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary databases. And then there's more that are subject specific. And so Engineering Village, Political Science Complete, GeoRef, you can tell by just the name what disciplines they represent. And really, what I always tell students, it's like they all look different, but the search logic is the same, right? It's the idea of putting in keywords, trying a variety of different keywords, seeing if you can apply limits if you need to. So for instance, potentially scholarly, potentially a date range. And just know that even though they look different in terms of their interfaces, they all work with the same kind of search logic. So just be aware that there's lots of different databases and to look at this research guide to determine which ones are recommended in your particular subject area. So I was going to do a search in Scopus. Okay, we'll try. Has anyone used Scopus or Web of Science? Jackson? Okay. Poor Jackson. Okay. I'm just gonna back up here. Okay. You can also see our database. There's a databases tab there. The thing I don't love about this database tab is if you have to know the name of the database that you're looking for, or if you go to the A to Z list, okay, look at that, 503 databases. Oh, like, that's a lot, right? And so I always recommend if you can go under teaching and learning and then go to research guides, then it's like, okay, what actually, what's recommended in my particular area? So I'm just going to pick political studies because why not? Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm going to highlight myself here because I know this one's stable. And so all the research guides look the same, where you on the left-hand side is the navigation. This will be going from a 3-column format to a 2-column format as of July 1st, but you'll see that the liaison librarian contact information is listed there. And they're basically follow the same same kind of format in terms of like, how do I find books? How do I find journal articles? That kind of thing. And you can see that in this case, I have different databases depending on what I think would be good sources in political studies. Oh, hope you don't mind. Okay. I'm surprised it's asking me to log in, considering we're on campus. But anyway, okay. So this is Scopus. Again, this looks different than USearch, but again, it works the same kind of thing. And so if we were to do food, I'll just do the same search again, just for demonstration purposes. I should say though, but like, I mean, let's just say I'm doing some research on food allergies and social anxiety. That's a common, or that's like maybe the first words that I use. But then as I do my research, I realize that maybe there's different forms of anxiety that I want to look at. Maybe I want to look at a specific type of food allergy, or maybe anaphylactic, or, like that kind of thing. And so it's the idea of just, for demonstration purposes, this is really kind of quick and dirty, but just know that when you're doing a thorough search, you want to make sure that you're using a variety of different keywords, or if you're not getting what you want, it's the idea of just being iterative in your searching. Yeah, and so Scopus is a multidisciplinary database, and so it includes both sciences and social sciences. I'm not so much in the humanities, but just like in USearch, you can see that there's that get it at USask link where it's showing me that yes, this article is available, but there's also a lot of open access material in this database as well. And so you can connect to it that way. in this particular database, they're sorting it by date, so the most current at the top. Other databases might search, or other databases might sort by relevancy. So it just really depends. One of the things I do like about Scopus is they have this analyze results link, and this is helpful, especially if you're doing, let's say, a literature review, and you want to kind of take a step back from the individual articles, and you want to see kind of like a trend more in like who's writing about this and what kind of when was this kind of popular in the literature and that kind of thing. And so one of the things that often supervisors might ask students would be like, who are the seminal authors in this area? And it's like, I don't know. But when you look at something like this, it kind of gives you that overview in terms of, in this particular area, these are the kind of authors that are kind of most prevalent in this particular area. So anyway, that's just a neat little option within Scopus.
That's nice though, because you know, a lot of the time when you're just new to a subject area or something,
Mhm.
you're finding articles and you're like, does this person, like, is this person even relevant?
Exactly.
Like they've written an article on it, they got it
Yes.
published obviously, but like, does anybody else care what this person has to say about this? So to be
Exactly.
able to sort of see who those, like, who should I be looking for as like, at least the core.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, for sure. I like that option too.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, because it's like sometimes when you're in it, like especially an instructor, they know the experts in that area because they live and breathe this for so many years. But when you're new to it, you're like, I don't know, is this a one-off or is this, is this a power player for sure, for sure. But yeah, and so just like every database, you click on the link. And then it gives you just more information about that particular article. And again, when you have your research question as your guiding light, you can make a decision quite quickly in terms of, does this source answer my research, help address my research question or not? If yes, awesome, let's add it to Zotero. If not, as much as it looks interesting, move on, right? Because it's, as I've said, oftentimes it's helpful to know what you're not looking at because you're going to be inundated with all these different information sources. So it's helpful to know kind of what sources you want to look at. And like most of our products, you can see that in this case, you can view the PDF. And as I mentioned like last week, if you come across an article and we don't have it, and it looks so awesome that you want to read it, submit an interlibrary loan and you probably get it within a day or so. So don't think that if it's not here, you don't have access to it. It's just might be a little bit, it might just not necessarily be immediate. Okay, awesome. So I'm not going to go to Academic Search Complete because again, it looks different. It uses an EBSCOhost interface, but it works with the same logic. And so it's just an idea of like, as I said, we have so many databases and it's just use them, play around in them. They're not hard. It's just the idea of it's a easy way of kind of surfacing some of those scientific or scholarly sources. So if there's sometimes you might stumble across, let's just say you're at home and someone said you should search Web of Science and you just go to the Web of Science website, it won't know that you're a university student. And so if you go through the university library, you authenticate and it's like, awesome, you're authenticated and then it'll show our what we have access to, our subscriptions and that kind of thing. Yeah, and so as you can use those limiters, you can use a variety of different search terms. If you're doing a comprehensive search and you're finding you're searching a lot in the same databases, you might want to create an account, and then you can just rerun your saved searches. There's lots of different things you can do to kind of optimize your search experience. But oftentimes we might be looking at sources beyond just kind of those scholarly sources that you might find. And so, we mentioned Google Scholar last week. And with when you're searching, Google or Google Scholar or other sources, it's just that idea of always asking, is this a reputable source? So like, why is this a reputable source? And is it deemed reputable? In some of the social sciences, we often are looking for like reports and like from organizations or think tanks and that kind of thing. And oftentimes a leading question when people are are, you know, looking for sources. It's the idea of like, who would care about this? Like, who would care about this topic, right? And so, for instance, if you're looking at mining safety in Saskatchewan, let's just say, you know, you're thinking like, where should I go to look for these kinds of sources, right? It might be workplace Saskatchewan or workplace safety organizations. It might be mining organizations. It might be, you know, uh, individual companies, it might be safety bureaus, that kind of thing. So if you kind of think, who would care about this? And then you can do some more targeted searching in terms of websites like that. We mentioned this last time, but if you haven't set your Google Scholar settings to ensure that you're getting that immediate access to the university library subscriptions, do that. And that just makes it so much more seamless when you're trying to make that connection from those sources to actually reading them. And we talked about this already, but it's just that idea of it's not always quick and dirty as with these demonstrations. Sometimes it, you know, you might come across, usually it's one of the two. You're not getting enough results, maybe you're only getting a handful, or else you're getting a million. And so it's the idea of what do you do when you come to those kind of forks in the road. If you're not getting enough research, it's the idea of what other words can I use to describe this? If you're getting too many results, it's the idea of how can I narrow down my search? What other words can I use to kind of narrow down that search? And so just knowing that this isn't a kind of one-time thing, that you have to kind of work at it to get what you need. I mentioned this last time, but it's just really important that you document what you're doing, especially when you're working on a project where you might not be the person that will be, you know, continuing on with it in a few months. Actually, I came across this yesterday where I did 10 years ago, I did a realist review on a group project, and we got published, and that was great. And then one of my colleagues said, "Can I see your search strategy from that?" And I was like, sure. And I didn't have it. I was like, what? I couldn't find it. I could find parts of it, but I couldn't find all of it. So yeah, that was not good. That's not good documentation. And so I wish I did have it, but I don't. And so when you're working on a group project, you want to make sure that you're documenting things that you don't even realize you might need it or they might need in years to come. So for instance, if they are doing some kind of review or, you know, they have to report their methodology, you want to make sure that you have all those things with regards to where did I search? When did I search this? What search terms did I use? Because all that allows this process to be transparent and reproducible, which is obviously the key of good science, right? So when, even if it might seem a little over the top, if you can document what you're doing, your future self will thank you. So one of the things that I often use, especially with graduate students, is because sometimes people are like, well, what does that look like when you say document your search strategy? Let's say this is like an example of a search strategy worksheet where you just write down kind of your main concepts, what search terms you're using, and that you can then, you know, you're only doing this kind of worksheet once and then you're applying it to different databases. So that might be something that you might want to adapt for your purposes. When we're looking at an actual search strategy, again, I'm throwing that word around, but what does it look like? When you're doing a more kind of advanced search strategy, this is an example of a search strategy from Medline, where it's just looking at that idea of using different words to describe and to help find references that would help address that research question. So the research question, does weight-bearing exercise reduce the likelihood of fractures in older women with osteoarthritis? You can see that they've kind of grouped their concepts. So you can see in this one, I have like concept 1, concept 2, concept 3, and what that looks like kind of in practice is you can see that first group of concepts are related to exercise. The second one is osteoporosis, and the third one is on bone fractures, and then you combine them. And so that's an example of maybe a little bit more of an advanced search strategy, but again, it's comprehensive because, you know, this person wants to ensure that they're getting a comprehensive set of results to answer this evidence-based question. And it might look different in your particular area. So I see that we're getting short on time. We were going to have a discussion about the role of AI because oftentimes that's like the elephant in the room. But I don't want to put Jackson on the spot more than I have to. And so one of the things that came up after a session last week was the idea of maybe how or why people are using it in their areas. And it was a great discussion. And I kind of wanted to kind of riff on that a little bit more, but I think it's more fulsome when there's, you know, as opposed to putting Jackson on the spot. But I think it is important maybe to think about it in terms of, again, always having a conversation with your research team in terms of, you know, being very clear and honest and thoughtful about if you are using it and how and at what stages. Because I know Jordan was talking about, you know, when you think about the brainstorming stage versus the producing stage, like that's a nice way of thinking about it. And just that idea of like, those disclosure statements. There's a new generator tool that goes through, let's see, I can pass it along to, I'll put the link on the slides, but it talks about the different stages of the research process. And it's a way of automating those disclosure statements because it talks about conceptualization, literature review, methodology, software development, data management, writing, editing, ethics review, and supervision. So it breaks it down, right? Where in terms of if you used it at one of those stages, you can further select how you used it, and then it generates a disclosure statement. I am not promoting AI use in research. It's more the idea of having an honest and open discussion about where it may or may not, or if all have a role in the research that you might be doing. That link on the slide goes to a Gen AI LibGuide guide that we have on the library website, and it talks about the different stages of the research process. So from like brainstorming to searching to writing, and talks about more kind of digs into those areas about kind of things to be aware of when you're using Gen AI with regards to implications and things to be aware of. So you can all dig into that if that interests you. Okay, so just to wrap up, I'm hoping this was helpful. As I mentioned, I use that Pentagon as a way of just kind of figuring out where we are in the research process and the idea of, you know, research is a process and it's not a linear kind of path, but one of the things that's often helpful is if you can really isolate, you know, what it is that you're trying to find an answer to or address your research question or research problem. That's really helpful because it helps guide the other stages of the process. And so when you're looking at, you know, when you're finding sources, you want to always be asking, you know, like, who do I trust? Who are some reputable sources that can help address my research question? And what is this evidence? What is the purpose? And how would I kind of classify this in terms of if it's credible research or evidence to help address my research question? And there's lots of different sources that we have in the library to help with that. So yeah, so are there any questions with regards to what we asked?
I have a question about the databases. The subject-specific databases, do they curate for reliable sources as well as for the subject?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about those sources. It's not a foolproof system, but the journals that are indexed in those databases have, in theory, been evaluated, right? And so they're not indexing journals that would necessarily be considered predatory or ones that are dodgy, that kind of thing. And so that's the publisher's role in terms of including content that's gone through some kind of evaluation process. Absolutely. For sure. Good question. Are there any questions online? Okay. Well, I guess that's it. Okay.
Well, thank you, Angie.
Thank you. Thank you for showing up, Jackson, and thanks for everybody online. I
Yeah,
appreciate
that's
that.
great.
Okay, awesome. So I'll stop sharing.